Good morning, classmates. This is Chang Moss. I'm going to be reporting on counselor impairment and counselor competency. So first of all, starting off with the first question that we had for our discussion, what are the most common reasons for the board discipline? For Virginia, according to the Virginia Department of Health Professions, I found from some of the recent rulings or orders that were placed. So there was one that was placed in 11/6/19. There was inappropriate use of testing and diagnosis with no established relationship. So the counselor did not establish a relationship with the person that she was running the diagnostic test on, or even giving a diagnosis for, and actually prescribed that the client had a therapy animal as part of treatment. On 11/25/19, there was billing for services that the counselor did not perform, so improper billing, billing fraud, and an issue with confidentiality because she was providing services as opposed to in-house services in a public area instead of actually providing those services in a house. So she was not providing a safe and private area for those services to be rendered. There was suspension of license due to a dishonored fee in 9/5/19. There's a suspension of registration, dishonored payment once again. There's dual relationships. So this counselor had adopted a child. She terminated the counseling relationship, but really didn't terminate it at the same time as becoming an advocate for this child when she moved from, I believe it was Washington to Virginia. There was a dual sexual relationship on 9/13/19. There was an ordinance for that, for the license to be revoked. There was a dual sexual relationship again, 9/4/19, different ruling, and a dual relationship where a counselor was providing services for a family member. Also, just summarizing some of the other findings that I found, Virginia had some more infractions. Most of the infractions were due to dual relationships, violation of confidentiality, failure to pay license fees, which we've seen in the recent ordinances, and substance abuse by the counselor. Questions that I have. One of the questions that came up, one of the major thoughts that came up for me is, I was really thinking about these sexual relationships. I think it's very interesting that some of these counselors, I don't know if it's a screening situation when the professionals in the field, the counselors who are supervising, maybe they are missing some things, or maybe it isn't very pronounced, or maybe these are feelings that are showing up later on while these counselors are starting to develop intimate relationships with their due to the nature of their empathy, developing intimate relationships with their clients. I find that very interesting that's happening, and I think it's a real risk. If a counselor doesn't know exactly who they are and isn't firmly establishing who they are. The role of self-care. According to Hunter in 2016, burnout is an accumulation of stress, job-related stress. Self-care is one of these things that will help us be able to reconnect with ourselves and not get so caught up in a job where the job becomes everything that's in our lives. I think it's very important for us to, as counselors or any type of profession, because I'm a professional teacher right now, to make sure that we take time for ourselves and that the job isn't our lives. And if it gets to be too much, maybe walk away for a bit. Find another job and then come back to the profession until you get a stronger sense of who you are. Your identity should never really be tied up completely in what you do for a living. So you have to remember that you are human and that you have an individuality that's outside of what you do for a profession. Giving and giving and giving for others can deplete you to a point where you're no longer able to give effectively. So I think that's a real issue. And I had written something down. It said a sense of intimacy can develop between counselors and the client due to the empathic nature of the profession. However, a counselor must self-monitor, seek counseling, and seek supervision. And so one of the things I plan on doing is making sure I seek supervision. Codes. The ACA Code of Ethics, section standard C2G, states that a counselor must seek assistance with problems and self-monitor for signs of impairment, also monitor each other for signs of impairment, and limit, suspend professional responsibilities until the issue is resolved. And also in standard F5B, this is actually referencing the same thing, but this is for the supervisor to be monitoring the supervisee or the subordinate counselor. And the Virginia Board of Counseling has issued in their document Standards of Practice 18 VAC 115-20-130, Section D, dual relationships and sexual contact. It actually speaks about dual relationships in the context of that they shouldn't be having. It's against the standards of the profession. It didn't go too much into detail about the actual impairment, but it does speak about specifically about sexual relations and sexual contact. One major question I have is, and not necessarily a question of redemption, but is there a point of no return when we get into dealing with compassion fatigue and burnout? Or would one be able to catch themselves before actually going into impairment, and would they even be able to recognize signs of impairment in themselves? And that goes back to me making a statement that I think is very important to continue having supervision, having somebody supervise me, or when I become a professional counselor. Even if I do become an LPC, I think it still is going to be very important to have somebody who's going to be able to supervise me or make sure that I'm okay and make sure that they're monitoring my stress levels and what I'm dealing with. I actually have one of my coworkers who's doing that now. Thank you all and have a blessed day.